Hello, Marco, and welcome to Making Remote Work.
Hello,
I'm
Julia.
Hi. I'm really, truly happy that we're kicking this off together. This is a new series. This is a limited series, which is led by the organizational design community, and it's hosted by Skills for Mars. And on this first episode, we are going to talk about the survey that you, together with Phanish Puranam, launched as INSEAD researchers,
Yep,
looking into remote work during COVID-19.
exactly. Exactly.
Before we go there, just so everyone knows who you are, would you be okay to present yourself and your work?
Absolutely. I am Marco Minervini. I am currently a Post Doctoral Fellow at INSEAD. My research touches upon mostly two big topics. So, one topic is exactly the one of new organizational forms, and the special focus is on remote companies, so companies that manage to work all remotely. And another type of focus is also on the part of managing space as a dimension of organizational design. So I go from one extreme of managing pure space in an from an architectural point of view to the other extreme, which is literally the all remote, so people that do not share the office at all. The other part of my agenda refers instead to collaborative initiatives that attempt to put data together. So data are a special type of resource, and as said, people may have a lot of challenges in joining data together and pulling data together. And I study how to these collaborative initiatives are designed, and focusing especially in the healthcare setting. Then I also reason in terms of how this different type of organizational design may influence the representativity of the data and the quality of this data. So these are mostly the two big topics I'm working in.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing this. Now we are going to focus, so on this series is solely remote work and how to make it work better.
Of course, of course.
So
And I
are you
think
ready
that
to tell us a bit about the survey? When did it start? How long it was? How many participants?
absolutely. So let me start sharing the screen. Okay, so the survey started in the mid of March, and then we started the first batch in the mid of March, and then this data referred to the data we extracted on the 24th of March. Then we basically decided to keep the survey open because our plan will also be to have a remote barometer. So one question, and you will see that, will be on reporting self-reported productivity. And so we want to have a barometer on how this productivity is evolving. We might have even competing hypotheses on whether the productivity will improve by learning, or for some others that will struggle the more and more that we stay at home, working from home, and also given all the stressors that come from the outside. And so the data relies on the extraction on the 24th of March. We got more than 500 respondents, but we decided to isolate the 429 responses that replied on the question, have you started working remotely in response to COVID-19? And they responded yes. So we isolated this specific sample.
Wow, so many started to work only due to COVID-19, such a huge percentage of the respondents.
Not strictly due to that,
Okay.
but clearly they have some special responses to COVID-19. So what we observe is that there was many people that were already working remotely, say once a week, once a month. So we have the whole distribution of people that work with a different frequency from remote. But I would say that clearly getting an answer in which that tells you that the company had a change in practices from remote working implies that basically they're now working completely remote and continuously remote.
Got it.
So let me start with a caveat. So most of the responses are representative of the INSEAD and LinkedIn ecology. So they're not representative of the workforce at large. We want to be very cautious. This is a very exploratory study. And the other part is that this is mostly a methodological caveat, is that we relied on respondents to get data both on the outcome of our interest, which is the productivity outcome, and of the predictor variables. And this might create a set of problems like common method bias. So this is just to say that the purpose of this survey was mostly exploratory. So this, I would say that the goal was not being extremely rigorous. We tried our best, but it's clearly exploratory to get immediately a picture of what's going on in the companies and how they are facing and addressing this challenge and sudden challenge of working remotely.
Let me stop you and ask you a bit. What does it mean that it's representative of the INSEAD LinkedIn ecology? And why I'm asking this is that we posted and you posted, and a lot of people reshared this on LinkedIn. So pretty much you did get replies, right, from quite a lot of people in different industries, different regions, different countries, different cultures. INSEAD, I imagine the same, right? So it's not that this was given to only INSEADers and only LinkedIn employees. It was promoted through this
exactly.
means. Okay.
It was promoted through these channels. And so by promoting this through this channel, we clearly have a skewed representation of the whole population. To give you a sense, we have mostly people that as a main task, they produce some intangible. So either intangible output, they manage people, they provide a service, but these are type of tasks that are not fully representative of the population. So clearly we are also partially missing blue collar jobs. That is one of the caveat that we wanted to introduce. So we're not clearly representing the whole spectrum of people.
So this is mostly white collar.
Yeah, this is mostly white collar. Yeah.
Okay, and when we say that this is exploratory, is this because we rely on right? People are self-declaring their productivity. It's not their managers, it's not the organization who's declaring their productivity or what leads to their productivity, but they are self-evaluating themselves.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons. So on the one side, there's the problem of self-evaluation. And on the other side, there's also this problem of common method bias, in a sense that it might be that people that might tend to reply to all the answer in a consistent way may generate this data after this type of behavior may generate some relationship that might be just due to how the instrument is designed rather than the actual condition of the people. So
Perfect.
Say that a person tend to reply to everything and tend to reply to 4, and the other tend to always reply with 3, then you might find some correlation that might not be there. So the argument is that we want to be honest in saying that at this moment, speed and making sense of what's actually going on was prevalent with respect to other potential more complex sources of data that we might rely on in the future.
And I will mention this after as well. And I started reposting the link to the survey. The survey is still live on LinkedIn. And then to all those who hear this message, I will post it, and the organizational design community will also post it in the text of the podcast. So please, if you see this, do take the 5-7 minutes to fill in the survey, and maybe even ask your blue collar workers and ask everyone to fill in the survey as much as possible, because the more responses we get, the better the insights will be and the more it will help everyone.
Of course. So let me start with the representation on how the respondents were spread out through the world. So clearly, how the respondents are spread out also represent how the INSEAD environment is spread out in the world. So having campuses in Asia and in Europe and also in the Middle East, that in this case falls into the Asia category, we had a response of 45.2% from Europe, 35.5% respondents from Asia. Then the other group is The other batch comes from North America, 10.5%, and the rest is 3.5, all around 3%, South America, Africa, and Australia. Let me also say that we also saw variance across countries in terms of self-reported productivity. But let me also be cautious also on this aspect that basically we didn't want to make any strong claim in terms of countries, especially because we don't have data that are big enough to clearly represent the situation in each of every country. But still, there is variance across country that may be given by how they are used to remote work, what are the usual cultural conditions in that specific country, as well as, for instance, the degree to which they were stressed out by the external condition that was different across countries, especially if we think about 1 week and 2 weeks ago, in which the variance among countries was far stronger than in this moment.
Yeah, definitely. So the more insights we get, the more accurate it will get. And right now, this is representative for 429 people, so responses.
Yeah. So for aggregate information, that's enough. Mm-hmm. But if you think, then instead think in terms of countries. Among these countries are 150. So if you split the 429 across countries, then you have a little set of respondents for each country.
And plus, each country started to feel the crisis at different periods, as you said. So the more we go into this and we collect data, then the more accurate it will be, because most of them are now leveling up in terms of where they are with the crisis and remote work.
Absolutely. So let me start with very descriptive data, but I think that this is literally the result that somewhat confirmed the value of running this podcast and running this series. Because basically what we observe, and we compared technical versus organizational readiness, and we found out that technology is more ready than organizations. So our respondents agree that 80% of our respondents agreed that their technology infrastructure was effective at supporting their remote work, while just 50% agreed that their managers were supporting their remote work effectively, and 63% agreed that their organizational procedures were supporting their remote work effectively. So what does that mean is that, and that's an interesting thing, is that technology seems to be there and seems to be ready, again, considering our respondents. But on the other side, it seems that managers and the organizational design of the organizations and of the team seems to be lagging a little bit. And this is why we strongly believe, Phanish and Jay, that it is very important to share research and best practice on how to work remotely. Because at this point, the challenge is clearly more organizational than technical. This would not have been the same, say, 20 years ago. But as of now, clearly, technology is proving to be very effective.
True, and I think this is consistent with what I've listened. I've listened to the interviews of InVision and GitLab and everyone else who seems to be working all remote. And then pretty much they are not using so many technologies, right? To the minimum, you need a Zoom, Skype, Teams, or a soft solution like that for video. And you need one for chatting. And then, of course, email is always there, but they're not very much relying on that. But the two biggest solutions that they use is video and chat. And you have plenty of options. And some of them are even free for smaller companies.
I would also say that both of them also rely a lot on their own product. Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting practice. So in a sense that their own technology, their own product helps themselves to work. So GitLab is relying extensively on GitLab itself to work, and that allows them to work asynchronously. In fact, we are covering a little bit a description of how GitLab works. The same works for InVision, which is basically or also themselves rely on their own product to develop that. But yes, it's true. So I would also say that, for instance, GitLab does not even rely on emails.
Yeah.
That's very interesting instance. So they reduce the type of technology they rely on. Clearly, their claim is that they cannot do anything that they were doing without the technology. But yes, clearly the problems that they need to solve and the most pressing problems are not related to technology. Still, both GitLab and InVision are trying a set of innovations more at the organizational level. So they are really careful on how they design the organization, how they design the incentive, how they design the division of tasks, the allocation of tasks, the flow of information. But still, the technology are pretty standard. So everyone can get access to the technologies that they are using, basically.
This is good to know that at least one part works well or well enough, and that we need to focus on another segment, and that's the organizational side, and that's the supporting employees and supporting managers to move to remote work. At least we know that this is where the focus should be.
Exactly. I also think that at the beginning, the focus was mostly on technology. So if I have to think that the reasoning was, if we have to face this challenge of working remotely, let's get the technology right. So the first hygiene factor is that in our case, our sample seems to work very well, but still, if we need to we're not claiming that basically the technology is irrelevant. We're simply saying that, yes, you need to get the technology right, but it's clearly not enough to make an organization work and to make your employees satisfied of working in this condition and making your organization effective.
Understood.
Let's move to the core outcome of interest, which is the self-reported productivity. And this is the answer to the question that we put almost at the end of the survey. And we asked, on the whole, do you think you have been more or less productive when working remotely instead of working from your office? And what we observe is that still it's self-reported productivity, but 40% of our respondents mentioned that they have a productivity improvement. 37% mentioned that they have no difference in productivity, while 23% of them had claimed to have a productivity decline. But I mean, we were interested clearly in this measure, but what is most interesting is instead what are the predictors of productivity. So what are the positive and negative correlates of productivity? And let me start with the first point, which is the hierarchical level. So hierarchical level is positively correlated with self-reported productivity. What does that mean? Basically, in the survey, we splitted the hierarchy in 3 levels. So we had managers of managers, so people that had at least one subordinate, which is a manager. Managers, so the ones that have subordinates, but within this group of subordinates, there was no manager. And then the group of subordinates, the one that had no report. Mm-hmm. And what we found out is that the managers of managers are the one that report higher productivity. We have a set of competing hypotheses. So it might be just a measure of wealth, in a sense that they live in a context that might be more conducive for work. One other alternative hypothesis might be the one of having more time to get isolated. So it might be the managers of managers gets a lot of input while they are in the office. And in this moment, they have instead more space for being isolated. So still, this is one of the relevant dimensions. So we see that managers of managers are the ones that self-report better productivity.
This is really interesting, and I think I was thinking that I just had a podcast recording yesterday with Ravi Gajendran, right, who talks about autonomy, and I was thinking that maybe the managers of managers they might help themselves to more autonomy, or they might receive more autonomy for their managers, right? Because they are higher in the hierarchy, so they get maybe more tenure in the company, more trust because they've been working there before, they have proven their results, so they get more autonomy versus them giving autonomy to their people. And it does feel like where research in normal work, remote work settings, autonomy does lead to better productivity levels. So I was thinking that maybe this is related to this as well.
Yeah, of course. In a set, can you just rephrase the relationship?
Yeah. So the higher the autonomy, so Ravi did several researches which connect autonomy to productivity in remote work settings. Right?
Yeah, and he found that there's a positive relationship.
Exactly. He found that there's a positive relationship, right? So I was thinking that at this level, right, the managers of managers, then they might get more autonomy because first they might give it to themselves. Usually, if you have a CEO level or an executive level, they are not really keen on command and control type of leadership, right? It's more, I let you work, I trust you, we've been working together, we've been exposed to each other for a long time, we've been making decisions together. So the autonomy level that I feel that it's given to managers of managers, it's way higher than they give their subordinates, right?
Okay.
Because the lower you go in the hierarchy, or at least that's my experience by working in organizations, the lower you go in hierarchy, the more you have a kind of command and control style of leadership. It's the easiest to learn, right? That's again research proving that it's really easy to learn. You just tell people what to do, when to do it, and you control what their environment. Whereas to give autonomy, you have to learn how to give trust, you have to learn how to empower. So the higher you are in a hierarchy, the more experience you get, you might learn how to give this autonomy.
The more autonomy you can build for yourself. Basically.
Exactly. And you can build for yourself, so and it's given to you as well.
Potential mechanism.
Yeah. And it might be a potential mechanism, but with a caveat as well that the research that Ravi and his collaborators did was done in normal remote work settings, right? Not during a pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was my correlation, that because I had the discussion with him yesterday, and it felt interesting to correlate this maybe with autonomy as well.
Okay, let me just move to the next point, which is that related to one other predictor is previous experience in working remotely, and mostly the relationship is explained by the ones that basically it's a positive relationship, and the core difference is between the ones that never experienced to work remotely and the ones that work remotely for less than a year. These are the categories that perform far worse, while instead the ones that at least had a little bit of experience, so they were working at least once a month or at least once a week or even more frequently, they have better performance. This is somewhat obvious. This is something that can be expected. So at least having a small experience in working remotely can increase your productivity. And let me just cover one aspect, because sometimes in research, the other part that is important is to find what are the aspects that are not relevant. So you might have an hypothesis that, for instance, industry or company size or nature of work might affect the productivity. None of them seems to be relevant, both in terms of statistical significance, both in terms of explaining variance. We explain the no relevance of industry, mostly due to the type of sample we are relying on. So still, these are people in the office. But that's interesting. Though there were some industries that were concerned on the fact that maybe our industry is so peculiar that we cannot go remote. That seems to not be the case for office level people. Company size still seems to be not relevant. And again, nature of work is mostly due to the fact that most of our respondents are workers that work on intangible outputs. Mm-hmm. So in this respect, the feeling is that there was not even much differences. So the nature of work that was most prevalent was making decision, producing intangible output, producing a service, and managing people. So all of them seems to be activities that all in all can be all performed.
Very interesting.
One other aspect that is a good predictor of productivity is work-life balance. So the ones that reported higher work-life balance then were also the ones that reported higher productivity. And we also believe that in this respect, this may even be a source of inequality, because the two factors that explain mostly the increasing work-life balance is basically space available. So how the space available is fit for work. So this clearly may be conditional on wealth, on the type of condition they're around. And the other is time of commuting, which I would say is also, except from influencing productivity through work-life balance, is also has a direct effect on productivity. So the ones that are more happy to avoid the commuting are the ones that report a higher productivity, which I guess tells something very interesting, especially on the future of remote. So this means that the biggest gain, still somewhat obvious, but the biggest gains are in countries, in places, in areas in which people will avoid to commute. So this reduction in commuting, especially if it's particularly sensitive, then yes, it is transformed into an increase in productivity.
And I think it's maybe multiple folded with avoiding commuting, right? So I'm just thinking that maybe you use the time for commuting, and you have places like London, which is just one city, but commuting time might be 2 hours or even 3 hours a day. Paris is the same, right?
Okay.
Sometimes Singapore can be the same. If you live in the other side of the country, if you're taking the bus, it can take you 45 minutes to get to work, and then it's an hour and a half a day. So you can use that space and time to do something different, to even work. And then I'm also thinking it's motivational as well, because instead of being tired, it does tire you. I did do commuting for longer times as well. You just feel like, hey, this is such a blessing that I can do this, and you're just happier to work and do anything else.
Absolutely. I completely agree. But clearly, we also have to take into account the opposite. So there are many cities in which commuting might be very limited, many small cities. And in that respect, clearly, avoid commuting may even have very important implication on the environment. So that would have been a completely different story, and we're talking at a policy level.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I believe that still we need to take into account that not all the countries may have the commuting problem that, for instance, is pretty common in the US. So the degree to which remote might get traction may also depend at a country level to the degree to which commuting influences the life of people.
True. Very interesting.
Then we move to the negative side of the story. So what are the factors that instead negatively affect productivity? And the ones that miss the social interaction were the ones that have a lower productivity. In this respect, we have to take into account that office is also a social environment. So people might get utility from social interaction. Another important aspect that we found in our analysis is that we said, okay, maybe the ones that were missing social interaction were also the ones that need to interact socially just to solve problems. So we have that variable that was, we need constant communication to solve problems. That was not the case. So social interaction was independent, whether they had to continuously communicate or not. So the idea here is that basically confirms some existing evidence that social interaction is somewhat an intrinsic motivator. And so it is per se a motivator, and it seems that this research confirms that.
Isn't this interesting? Because you would think that only if you need to interact, right, then you would miss it and it would affect your productivity. But it's very interesting that actually just because you don't have your colleagues around and you're not having the relationships that they're used to have, it doesn't motivate you enough to be productive. You're just missing that social interaction. So it demotivates you to work and be productive.
I would think that there are also other two reasons. One is related to the fact that usually what we observe in all remote companies, and we had a recent conversation with Darren that you're going to interview, so basically he's going to cover this topic again. But usually people that work remotely tend to compensate for this lack of social interaction by engaging a lot with their own community, which is not the current condition. So given that there's already some quarantine condition and isolation, you cannot basically compensate this lack of social interaction in the office with alternative social interaction, maybe also with people that matter for you the most. And the other aspect is that, again, really the office may be really a social environment. If you think about expats have a smaller social network in many respects. So an expat finding the job, especially at the beginning, most of the relationship that he has in the city. And so taking this opportunity apart for the expat may be highly problematic, and there may be missing social interaction. And in fact, this is in a managerial prescription at the end, we're going to cover how companies may try to address this type of problem.
Yeah, and then I'm even thinking that we are social beings, right? This has been proven over and over and over again. So without social interaction, and without the social interaction at work, without the community social interaction, then maybe things like depression kick in. And then, of course, you're not productive because you're not thinking about work. You cannot think about work in those moments. And by the time it takes you to get out of that and find your social connections and just pull yourself up, it might take you a bit of time to become productive. So I'm kind of curious how this evolves as the survey progresses.
Absolutely. And I think also Jay has done some work on meditation and mindfulness and the effect of productivity, especially in Wuhan. So I guess he will share his own research in the future. The other factor is distraction at home. So the more the distraction at home, the more the lower the self-reported productivity. And I mean, I strongly believe that one of the reasons is that, and we also started looking at the text of. In the survey, there were two parts of the text. There was a feedback part and a challenges part. And we are starting exploring the text. Then we are going to do something more rigorous. But just by looking at some of the comments, basically one argument was this is not the usual setting, and because we have kids at home. We have also our partner at home. So houses get very crowded, and distraction may be many and several, and maybe even more important. So in this respect, again, within the managerial prescription, we are also trying to cover this because we think that managers should acknowledge this type of challenge. So the fact that there may be competing forces, and to think carefully about how to design their teams and their organization in a different way so they can address this problem of distraction at home.
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking with Ravi yesterday, and then the suggestion was that, hey, cut your employees some slack, at least at the beginning, until they get used to their environment, until they manage to negotiate something with their family. And we were both sharing stories that we are still negotiating with our families, right? Because it's so easy. Hey, you're at home. Hey, Marco, do you want to cook something? Do you want to do this with me? Let's do this together. It's sunny outside. Do you want to sit on the terrace? Do you want a glass of water? So they're all additional interruptions than what you're used to when you're working. And because you are there, they don't necessarily recognize that you are working. And maybe sometimes you just work in the living room next to them. So yeah, cutting some slack, at least at the beginning, until everyone gets to set up their home office is really important.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting because in a recent conversation we had with Sid Sibrandy, which is the CEO of GitLab, we asked him, okay, look, what's the first suggestion you would give to people that are starting to work remotely and they're now facing this COVID crisis? And he said, look, take some rest and take your time. So his response was clearly in another direction than we expected. But clearly the point here is that everyone needs to learn. So organizations need to learn, managers need to learn, workers need to learn how to work. Especially, as we said, the ones that have no previous experience. So basically the ones that face this type of challenges suddenly.
Yeah, and there are distractions. I know I've been working from home for 10 years, and it's mostly integrated with my life. But there still are distractions. It's not that you ever get to have a perfect work from home, as you never get to have a perfect work in the office kind of day, right? There's nothing like perfect, so you always get distractions. So even having some slack in your calendar and not booking everything hour by hour is extremely important. Even though it seems that from home you'd be able to do it, because it takes you maybe 2 seconds to get some water and everything is close to you. But no, you do need some slack in your calendar, and you do need to take into account that there are distractions. And especially now that everyone is moving at home, and mostly people that have not done this before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. So there's a strong importance. Also, even to one suggestion, this is not at least research-based, at least in our research, but clearly to separate the space where you work, the space where you live, when possible, clearly. So that's clearly one relevant strategy. So
maybe that's
if you have two different tables, use two different tables.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's what the connection with the wealth in hierarchical level, right? Because if you might have an additional office where to work from, so of course you're more productive because you can run away from distractions.
Yeah, and that still speaks a lot about the, say, future of remote. So we need to take into account that there are some cities in which the cost of real estate is such that people might not strictly work there.
Yeah.
So hybrid remote solution would force people basically to still live in some specific cities, and where the cost of real estate may be particularly high, and still, so at home there would not be the correct space to work remotely. So still, this is something that we need to keep in mind also when this whole COVID isolation will finish, hopefully as soon as possible. But irrespective of that, for the future of remote work, it's clearly important to take into account also this factor of real estate space and the fact that remote workers need enough space to work properly.
Cool.
Let's move to the next point, which is basically related to means of coordination. This is purely descriptive, but we asked our respondents the question of, to help with remote working, I'm relying heavily on. And the technology that I mostly rely on is basically text. So what we mean is chat and emails. The second one is video. So our speculation that basically people are substituting the face-to-face interaction with video interaction. Far less use we observe less use of shared repositories. And by shared repositories, I mean either shared repositories like Dropbox, or collaborative document authoring tools like mostly Google Docs. And we're touching
or SharePoint. Exactly. You have Miro as whiteboards where you can share stuff.
Yeah, well, it's the whole spectrum, and amazing spectrum of all this collaborative technology that basically allow to see what the others are doing while they are doing that. And the one that is less used is phone. Interestingly, and I guess it's also there's an age explanation. The ones that are relying mostly on phone are managers of managers, the higher level of the hierarchy. So what's the take home of this descriptive data? Is that basically, and this is something that we know from experience, is that there's a tendency to default to synchronous communication tools. So in the sense that companies, organizations might tend to reproduce their behavior in virtual settings. So there they tend to reproduce the face-to-face meetings in a virtual setting. It's a pure reproduction of what happened in the real world it's a real world, but to the virtual setting. And what we observe is, as we said, less reliance less reliance on asynchronous tools like repositories. And I mean, from this point, we believe that we have a framework in mind that basically tries to capture the different ways you can manage coordination. And then I'll get into which way companies seems to be currently focusing on, while there might be some alternatives. And we want also to suggest that there are some alternatives, and these alternatives, especially given the current condition, might be extremely important for companies and managers to take into account. So the first part is that still there's a need for coordination. And I would also add one part, that given the fact that there may be less situational cues, there may be less social cues, and there may be less synchronicity in communication in a virtual setting. So despite the technology, still you cannot reproduce the same synchronicity in communication that you might have if we were in the same room, me and you at this moment, we would have a different type of conversation. So clearly we don't have the same synchronicity. So being virtual creates more problem for coordination. So you can do basically two things. On the one side, you can reduce the need for coordination. On the other side, you can manage the need for coordination. What I mean by reducing the need for coordination is basically what we call modularization. What is a modularization? It's basically thinking more carefully about how to divide the task between employees and team members in a way that you reduce to the minimum the need to coordinate between people. When they were in the same office, this challenge was not there. Coordinating was really, really cheap. So at this point, one of the potential alternatives is actually to modularize the task. So to decompose to self-living tasks. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we call it the blind solution. So blind means that people may not need to see what the others are doing, because basically they can keep doing their job, and it's on the manager to split the task in a way that this can happen.
It's more working in silos.
Exactly. It's not strictly, during the day, yes, you work in silos. Mm-hmm. And I would say that also the most rigorous evidence on gains in productivity that has emerged recently, and one of the most rigorous one comes from Raj Choudhury. I guess you're gonna talk with him in the next days. Yeah. Professor at Harvard, and he studied United States patent officers. And in that case, yes, this is clearly a situation in which there's modularization. So they take care of evaluating a patent by themselves. This is a self-defined and very discrete task. And in fact, he found out that there was a gain in productivity by the ones that were working from anywhere. So he basically also compared office, work from home, and work from anywhere. So modularization should be a solution that managers and organizations should take into account more cautiously, given the current condition. Then the other side will be manage the need for coordination. So one solution, the one we define as ongoing communication and see the face solution, is the one that we observe that companies are using the most. It's basically keeping the situation as it is and continues to try to reproduce the same synchronicity that you might observe in a face-to-face environment.
So really replicating the office.
Literally replicating the office. And in fact, let's see the face. So it's face-to-face, it's like experiences of people just staying on Zoom for 8 hours as if they were in the office, or having an infinite set of meetings as if they were in the office, but basically through a mean that, yes, reproduce in part the benefits that you might get from face-to-face interaction. And then there's another element is there. So instead of relying on ongoing communication, there may be tacit communication. And on one side, tacit communication is synchronous tacit communication. We call that CDNs. So the use of collaborative tools. So the coordination in this respect is on product, which is something that we observe a lot also in all remote companies. Basically, most of the coordination is also called stigmergic coordination, because it reproduces the way the ants tend to coordinate together. The coordination tend to be on the product. So you see what the other is doing and you continuously adapt to what the other is doing, not by talking, but just seeing the ends. And the other solution is asynchronous. So while there's a tacit communication through the collaborative tools may be synchronous, the alternative solution is to consider asynchronous solutions. And I think that GitLab is one of the best examples. So given that they have 1,200 employees spread out across the world, they need and they're forced, and across all the timelines, they are forced to work synchronously.
And they have a work from everywhere kind of policy.
Exactly. They have a work from everywhere approach, but they have a lot of practices that allow this tacit communication. So they have, for instance, a clear task division. So that's pretty similar to a modularization part. So they divide the task to the minimum possible task, the smallest task as possible. The other practices that they work with through minimum viable changes. So as far as you complete something, or even if you are in the process of completing something, they tend to share it. They ask employees to share it as soon as possible. In this way, you can have coordination because I can immediately see what you're doing. It's still a tacit one. And then they have also extensive documentation, which is another important aspect. So the one core element of tacit communication is that either you socialize a lot your employees, so the ones that basically, imagine like something that looks like a couple. A couple after many years, you have a lot of tacit communication, so you don't need to speak. You know what the other is gonna do, and so you behave consequently. So you just need to see the ends, basically. But on the other side, what they have is that instead of this strong socialization process, and especially because they were scaling very fastly, they had this extensive handbook. So they always had a source of truth from which an employee that needs to figure out how to coordinate with others, how to do something in a way that can allow a tacit coordination, they can extensively rely on a handbook that was very rich and describes all the practices. So let me say another point, going back to ongoing communication. So what we saw before is exactly one other peculiarity of ongoing communication is that it calls for synchronicity. And given the current condition, this can be clearly a problem. So if you have other forces that are distracting you, and you have to take care of other forces, and any other distraction, synchronicity may not be the optimal solution. So this is why in our managerial representation, I would consider recommendation. I would consider them more as ideas, more than strictly very prescriptive thing, but that we would suggest to think about this potential solution. On one side, there's the idea exactly of start to think about work processes that are different. So not strictly replicating existing work processes, but to think of work processes that may be more self-contained, and we are in the direction of modularization, or they may allow for more asynchronous coordination. And clearly the experience that we are going to share on GitLab and your conversation with Darren clearly can help managers and organizations to know how to best design asynchronous coordination, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot of complementary efforts to make asynchronous coordination possible. But clearly,
it goes a bit against the general practices and beliefs of people, but It does seem to work. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that as well and sharing this.
But I would say that on the other side, it generates the type of benefits that we usually assign to working remotely. So this idea of autonomy, of flexibility, is clearly linked to also to the possibility of working asynchronously. Because if you need to work synchronously, and especially in this setting, so usually one usual approach in a hybrid situation. So one person was just working from home this day, that day, and not all the others day of the week. Is that simply you do a set of tasks one day, you do a certain type of task in the days in which you are in the office, and the day in which you're home is a special day. This is clearly not the condition, so you need to build a system that can be asynchronous. It's not just a synchronicity just for one day. So it's like, let's not set meetings in the day I'm working remotely. That's fair enough in a normal condition, 4 days in the office, 1 at home. But in this condition, it's completely different. There's no day in which you can say, let's not set the meeting. So the reasoning should be somewhat different.
True, and then I think we need to think of the benefits of asynchronous coordination. I know I give myself as an example, but I'm working a lot with Singapore, right? I'm in Europe and I work with Singapore, but this allows me the time to support them. So my afternoons is when Singapore sleep, right? When everyone in Singapore sleeps. So I can work on stuff, and then when they wake up in the morning, it can be ready for them to review. Yeah, maybe we have 6 hours difference, but this allows us to do way more work together, way more than if we would have worked in the same time frame. And then if you work with the US as well, then this allows you to work basically 24 hours a day. If you know how to manage this kind of work and how to manage the processes, you get way more output out of it.
Absolutely. And I guess that just to introduce another future speaker, I guess Sujin covers a lot.
Yes.
This type of topic. So the role exactly of managers and the benefits of the managers that tend to coordinate and across different time zones, exactly to realize the type of value you mentioned. And I mean, time zones also, especially in the Sujin case, also implies cultures. So
yes.
In
We will talk about
case,
both.
It's not just time, but also in terms of how you then, times is also related with cultures and how managers would link different cultures and how can behave as a combinator of different culture and bridges. Yeah. One other aspect is clearly socialization. So we saw that the ones that felt that they missed their colleagues were the ones that led lower performances. So we need to think carefully about online socializing. There may be different solutions. A solution that we observe from some remote companies is to create some breakout rooms. So it's like creating an office lobby where in case you want to have some spare time, you can go to the office lobby and you will find someone there. It's clearly, in my fields, initially slightly natural. So it's not obvious, but it's good to have this breakout room. I would also share one practice that actually comes from GitLab. I don't think they are the only ones, but they have a very interesting practice in that in this type of breakout rooms, they include a daily question. So, and that daily question may act as an icebreaker. Like, which was your last traveling experience? So it would sound weird that I need a break and I go into this breakout room, but at least if I meet someone else, then maybe I don't know that somewhat having this starting question may be a good icebreaker. And we are also thinking about one other alternative, which is basically online gaming. Mm-hmm. Because what we would love to reproduce is a type of instance in which your brain is not fully committed to the conversation, but is partially committed to something that doesn't take fully your brain, but still take a part. But then you keep have a conversation, a natural conversation with the others. Because this is what happens usually also in normal offices. So maybe you are doing something else, and in the meanwhile, you talk with someone else, and then you have ideas. This is how also ideas are generated. So creating instances of socialization not only has a motivational implication, but clearly can have also implication in terms of ideas generation.
Yeah, and I think this is truly a chance to get to know your colleagues better. Everyone becomes extremely vulnerable because you're immediately in their home. You are no longer in the office,
Absolutely.
but you can see their home, right? So just being curious, asking them questions, realizing who they are, who you're working with, I think can really tie some really, really strong bonds in this period.
Absolutely. This is also what Mark will tell you
Mhm.
that in his experience and vision, the first day that basically they are already in their home.
Exactly.
So their manager is already looking in the home of
Yeah,
the
exactly like
employees,
we're
which
doing
is
right now.
usually
I see your home, you see my
yeah,
home. We've never met each other face to face.
yeah. I
But
mean, you see a lot of white actually, not much of my home.
but
I
I am
can
in
tell
your
you
home,
that.
so that says
Yeah,
something.
yeah, that clearly, absolutely. And the other part, so now we are in a really tough period. So there are a lot of challenges, but we also believe that there's an underlying opportunity, which is the one related to data. So before this moment, many organizations were not able to capture through digital traces internal interaction. So the whole informal structure of the organization was not available in terms of data. And it's pretty complex to collect that. Instead, in this moment, would be a good occasion for managers and organizations to think carefully about capturing capturing the interactions and data traces to understand how the informal organization works. And then, in theory, to adapt the formal design or the future space design
To
to
support.
this type of interaction and to support them. Exactly. And in this respect, we are pretty expert on this. So if anyone wants to contact us to discuss
That's what
about
I wanted
how
to
to do that,
to ask, because
that's
I think
great.
a big limitation, a big blockage for this is okay. Yes, of course, there is a lot of data. What should we look for? What is important? What are maybe the first 5, 10 aspects that we should be recording? And then after we have recorded that, what can we use to sift through the data? Who can help us analyze and make sense of it? Because I don't think organizations right now have either the capacity or the capability to do that. So would 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 we be okay to share a sort of framework like, hey, these are the 5 top things you should think of collecting data for, and then if you need to make
Absolutely.
sense of it, then here's how you can get in touch with us and we can support you doing that.
Yeah, we can partially develop this list.
Hmm.
I would say that one thing that I believe they need to be extremely cautious, but this is mostly in respect to the current uh, remote working situation, is the inter-team communication. So one thing that they might try to capture data on is how much communication is taking place between teams, because internally teams are still working together,
Hmm.
but it's not fully clear whether between teams they are still communicating between them. So this is the type of data. I would say that I guess there are a set of even companies that offer this service on tracking interaction between through Slack, for instance, or even tracking the exchange of emails. The content per se might be extremely irrelevant. It's just at the beginning, especially to get a full picture, it's just a matter of tracking what
Volume.
is the volume, and then maybe in a second phase you may track what's even through surveys. So another alternative is also to collect to complement, data that are traces, so like email, Slack, Zoom calls, meetings, with actually data that are intendedly collected to then get, for instance, some nature of the
Hmm.
interaction. And then you're gonna discover whether what you're losing is problem solving interaction or ideas interaction.
Or you might discover influencers right?
Exactly.
Social connections and social nodes that you can work through them afterwards and use them for the organization. So I think it would be interesting, Marco, if we can put together some things that companies should collect. And then again, we are not talking about content, right? We are and
we're
personal
literally
data.
content mostly of clearly something that is privacy safe.
Yes.
We don't want to go in any way that might violate privacy. It's just a matter of having a big picture.
That would be nice, and then I can
organization.
discuss this because I'm sure Mark used to collect this data, and Darren with Envision and GitLab, and I can ask them as well what sort of data they are collecting to really understand how the organization is functioning, and social networks, blockages, and all of that, and we can afterwards add to that list that we are putting together. Because this is a unique moment. This is a moment that we should consider as an experiment as well. And why not try to learn something from it?
Exactly. So there are a set of dynamics. Maybe some dynamics would disappear. Like people that go together for lunch. This is a type of dynamic that usually takes place in the real world, but might not take place in the remote world. But still, so there may be even links that managers may not even know, and that would instead create a lot of synergies. So getting a sense of these dynamics, and now that every interaction can be traced digitally, still with caution on privacy, but getting a sense of what's going on, this is clearly one of the moments in which you have this strong opportunity. And I would also say that, in fact, one of our claims related to all remote companies is that they are the ones that are building the data for any eventual revolution in terms of automation and machine learning. So they are literally building data that can help predictive tools to help organization. Because basically they are capturing most of the interaction, they are capturing task completion still. And that's something that can give them a competitive advantage in the future.
And what they also do is they are extremely transparent. I mean, you can find the GitLab handbook with their metrics, with what they do, with their introductions, onboarding, and everything. You can find it online. So they're extremely, extremely transparent to the level of salary and how they think about salary and benchmarking and everything else. So they are extremely, extremely transparent, and this engages their employees very much. I mean, if you look at their Glassdoor scores and how employees think about them, and then this transparency, it's extremely highly valued.
I mean, transparency for them is fundamental. It's fundamental to create this tacit coordination. So basically, you see whatever other people are doing. One other aspect that is very relevant when you think about this type of organization, this all remote organization, is that clearly this might be a challenge. Mm-hmm. So being extremely transparent can basically sort out all of the people that might already know that they might not fit with the organization. This is another core dimension of organization that sometimes overlooked, and unfortunately, this is not the type of dimension that managers that are currently facing this issue can deal with. But basically what GitLab does is that they are very careful in the hiring process. And I mean, this is common in organizations that may have unusual designs. So even in very flat organizations that we usually, with the GitLab case, we plan also to teach a case on Valve. This is a very flat organization. Mm-hmm. In that respect, they are all fully co-located. This is completely the opposite. And in that case, still, the hiring process is very demanding, even in the setting. So sorting is a dimension that clearly is important to make this innovative type of organization work.
This is Valve, the gaming platform.
The gaming platform, mm-hmm. Exactly. If you then explore how they work internally, that's literally amazing. It's very unusual.
Truly interesting. What's the fourth recommendation?
The fourth is develop skills. This is a call for managers. So this is also an occasion to improve the written communication skills. So we saw that most of the communication now is going through text. So it's important to develop concise and unambiguous writing skills. And I would also say one other thing that comes from a conversation with Mark Frayne. He said, look, especially in this period, but not all in this period, remote managers should be very good in communicating. Because once you are communicating something, once you are communicating a mood, you don't have a second occasion to recommunicate that, or you have less of it. So if in that day you look concerned, it might be that your next interaction will not be in the elevator 2 hours later, might be some days after. So the ability to communicate and communicate clearly, even more in a crisis condition like this one, is extremely, extremely important. And clearly, managers, now that we know that, for instance, managers of managers are performing better, so they are gaining performance, they are self-reporting higher performance, it's good that then now they invest on team management skills and virtual team management skills, so that, they bring together all the other employees into these performance improvements. So
I think this is really critical. And then most of my friends, when they heard that we are going to do this series, most of them had issues with written communication, and they came back because I asked them, okay, so if you were to ask something, what are you dealing with? And most of them said, look, it's so crazy with email. First of all, we are overloaded. Second of all, we don't seem to understand anything of what's happening. If I send something to my boss, this gets forwarded, and I did not write it in the proper way, so this gets forwarded to the boss of the boss, or it gets forwarded to the organization. I don't understand exactly what they want. There's so much miscommunication via email that I don't know what to do. I was never faced with this kind of situation.
Well, I would say that this is something that is also a cultural challenge, and still that's also talk about different cultures in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the type of example you raised, it's clearly an example of a company where there's no shame policy, which is instead should be very relevant in remote settings. So the no shame policy should be so. What is important in a remote setting is that everyone is on the same page, not that everyone produced the perfect product. The perfect product would be the final outcome, but it is better to know what the other is doing instead of not knowing what the other is doing something in the meanwhile, and then having a duplication of effort. So the core part is that many companies need to learn is exactly to try to implement a no shame policy. So get something out more fastly. You can even share the fact that this is a work in progress, I need to clean it up, but at least the other need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it gets very messy. And well, on the other side, one of the rules that I observed that GitLab has is write as if you are. So they have these two elements. So you need to be clear that you are working on something, but then when the something is complete, write, especially in the handbook, write as if someone external is reading. So try to be as clear as possible. And this is something that clearly we do not expect companies to become perfect communicators in seconds. But given that this challenge will take us for some months,
and then
they have time to develop communication skills.
Definitely. And I think another good one is assume positive intent, right? Because
Absolutely.
Especially because of language differences and not everyone being fluent in every language, then you might miss out some wording, right? And then assuming positive intent is always good. And this is what definitely all the old remote companies tell you. And this is one of their core values. Just assume that the other one meant to work together with you, had the best intentions, and didn't mean to stop you from doing anything or to block you from doing anything. And also, I was talking yesterday with Ravi, and this will be the second episode that will come out. When you say, hey, you've done a great work in email, the other person feels positive, but less positive that if you were there facing him, and so that he can
Absolutely.
feel the energy. And then on the
Absolutely.
very negative side, if you send negative feedback through emails, it's perceived even more
Worse.
powerful. It's even worse. So be very, very careful when you communicate negative feedback, or you want to say that, hey, this is not exactly what I'm looking for, because it will be perceived way worse on the other side. They will not be able to see your expression, your energy, your face. So it might just kill someone's day just because they received that email, and they might get totally demotivated. So
Absolutely. And I would also add one thing. Writing very well doesn't mean writing like in school. So, for instance, there's a great innovation that can help a lot of companies exactly to try to reproduce technologically that's not the same as face to face. But there's one technology like emoji, which
yeah,
can clearly be used to deliver more nuanced messages. Clearly, still, there may be ambiguous interpretation, but emoji may be clearly one of the tools that can be used to deliver emotions and feelings. So
and it's
that's
nice to use them as well. They give a bit of
yeah,
color.
it is. Yeah,
I'm a
that of
girl, so
course. And I mean the other interesting part, at least if I think about GitLab, is that they create also emoji for some values that they value. And that's clearly an interesting tool, because basically this allows you to even reinforce some of the values. So if you behave according to one of the value that company consider relevant for their existence, then you include in the map of the potential emoji also these emoji that represent company values.
yeah. Very interesting. And thinking back a bit at, I think it was the collaboration slide, the need for collaboration. I'm thinking that maybe at some point, I'm not sure if these are usually stages that companies go through, because it feels like it, right? First, you try to replicate remote what you're doing in the office. Then you're trying to work as much as possible synchronous, and then move to a later stage where you work asynchronous. I don't. Maybe it's not a good time to move through all the levels, if these are levels and we discover that this is something that actually exists. And maybe it's really good to take the good examples of the all remote companies and try to move to asynchronous as quickly as possible. Maybe that's food for thought.
I would also say that most of these framework, far less the asynchronous part, but most of these framework come from, I guess you're talking also with Srikanti
Yeah.
in the future. And they, with Phanish, they also work on this when the challenge emerged due to offshoring. So even in offshoring, we saw the same thing. Historically, the tendency was to try to reproduce even in offshoring the type of face-to-face interaction. Well, then figuring out that was a challenge, and that was a learning process of companies to going from one solution to others. Clearly, it will be very complex. We are not saying that that's the only solution, because in some cases the type of interdependencies that are there are such that it's not possible to go through these different alternatives. But what we wanted to do here was to also highlight the limitation of ongoing communication given the current conditions. So the suggestion is not saying, oh, the others are the best, but the suggestion is to start thinking on, okay, what about the others? Can I split the task in a way that there's less ambiguity? Can I let the people work more asynchronously and allow them to take care of their own personal challenges and their own kids. Also because in some I would say that in some families, and I saw that in the Italian experience of homeschooling, there are not like 5 computers. So if the kids should homeschooling, you should find another time in which you can actually work asynchronously. So the challenges are many. We don't have a perfect solution, but the suggestion is that we want to go to alternative ones.
I think this is a really, I moved the light, the
Okay.
spotlight on us. I think this is a really, really good and interesting start of a survey and understanding what's going on out there. And it's going to be a very, very good basis of discussion with Mark, with Darren, and everyone who's actually practicing all remote. And they're going to be good cases moving forward so that others understand how they do different things. And so far, I mean, they have a lot of videos and everything put online. They share a lot of materials, but there are also processes and parts of their business that they're not yet share, or I haven't seen it in online videos. So I would like to touch upon that as well with them. So I think this is going to be extremely helpful, and it's moving away. What I like is that we are moving away from best practices. So looking at what the colleague has done or what the other company next to us has done and implementing the same thing. More looking towards solutions that have been researched and looking at experts, looking at practitioners who have done this for a longer time to understand what we can do better to make this work and make this work quicker.
Yeah. The core idea is to try to have somewhat a scientific approach. So to start with a theoretical reasoning and to look at what are the theoretical framework that all the academics and even the different companies have in mind, and then try to test all the different hypotheses. So it's clear that where the two companies you are going to meet, for instance, are companies that are software companies. So whoever is doing something else that is not software has a set of characteristics that makes it very amenable to remote work. But any companies should start thinking, okay, this is their model. Let's see whether, for instance, the different product may actually have a nature such that we cannot do that. Or we cannot implement this specific practice, but maybe the other ones can work. So the idea here is literally no best practice at all. So it's literally think carefully, get all the intellectual framework, then any of the scholars you're going to meet are going to advance and take home what you think is going to work.
And we are going to do this quiet. So we decided once a week to have a podcast release. I'm having quite a lot of recordings, so maybe we can review that and maybe release them even more often. We will see with Phanish and see what's happening.
Perfect.
In the meanwhile, I do want to repeat my call to everyone who's listening and to look at the survey online. I will share it, Marco will share it, Phanish will share it, and you will see it in the text of the video as well. Please fill it in and ask as many of your employees to fill it in. And maybe one set of data that you can already start recording is performance. So then at some point, we will have data that we can correlate with actual performance rather than declared performance.
Absolutely.
Maybe it will work, and we will see. We can get even more insights out of this study.
Exactly. So the fastest thing that clearly we can offer is absolutely the one of creating this barometer.
Yep.
And there's one other thing that we are trying to do, and we are engaging also our MBA students, we are trying to also build diagnostic tools, that a survey that might look pretty similar to the survey we have developed, but it can be perfected according to the needs of the different companies. So these MBAs that have some experience in different companies are the ones that are now in charge of helping us to develop a tool that can also be used internally. So this is one other next step. And clearly the other next step that we have in mind is to start to analyze the text. So this is a way, to get a better understanding of what are the factors that might explain lower or higher performance.
Thank you, Marco, very much. And
thank you, Julia.
Thank you. And for everyone listening, we will post this on the Organizational Design Community website, on the YouTube page of the Organizational Design Community, on the YouTube page for Skills for Mars, and we will definitely share this via LinkedIn. This is a free podcast series that we are doing for everyone, so they can take benefit and use the knowledge of all the experts out there.
Absolutely. We are extremely happy if any people working out there can take and learn at least one thing from what we are sharing and what all the people are sharing in the next sessions. So thank you very much,
Thank
Julia.
you. Take care and have a nice evening.
Thank
Bye,
you.
bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.